Welcome to GMFC Studios, God's production company.
Brother and police officer. He is a retiree, which is what many of us that I believe this conversation will reach are hoping that we can get to. Without further ado, I just want to introduce William. They call him Bill. Some people that know him from way back when call him Satch, and maybe he'll tell you a little story about that, Paige. But he is a retired detective from the Greenburgh Police Department, and he has a tremendous testimony. And when I say testimony, you all know me being a chaplain for the Columbus Division of Police. What has kept me solid is my faith in God. And Bill has an amazing testimony, which is going to really deal with a lot of the things that we deal with as police officers today. And this is related to our series that we're working on, Trauma and the Badge. A lot of people will argue that they don't understand what it is to be a police officer and what police officers go through today. We were looking at Blue Help earlier today, and we understand that according to the numbers, in the year of 2022, there have been 128 suicides by police officers nationwide. And that is a tremendous number of people taking their lives. And it is our desire that something that is said, that something that you hear from this conversation that Bill and I will have may help you and give you a different perspective. Because what's not revealed in the number of suicides, which are those who actually completed it, what's not revealed are the number of people who have contemplated it, are the number of people who maybe haven't contemplated suicide, but are using all kinds of things that are not really helpful to deal with the trauma that we face every day. We have a very unique profession. And that profession is that we see humanity 98% of the time at its worst. And that is very troubling and traumatic and can be a lot to deal with. So it's our desire that we help you find healthy ways to deal with the things you're dealing with. Bill, if you would just do us a favor and just give us a brief history about your time in law enforcement.
Well, I went on the police department in the year 1970. I just come out of the military. I was a military policeman when I was in the service. I was stationed here in the States and then up on the DMZ in the 2nd Infantry Division in Korea. Came back from there, got married while I was overseas, and came back. And like as I said, in 1970, I became a police officer in a community just outside of New York City. I was born and raised in New York City, grew up in the Bronx in a pretty dysfunctional family, but I went on the police department. And as was said, I'm a retiree now, and I love being a police officer, and it was great, but I love also being retired, and I'm very glad about that part of it as well. And I don't know which I like most, but I'm glad to be on this side than when I was on the job before.
Amen. Now, you served 2 police departments, if I understand it correctly, the White Plains Police Department for a couple of years, and then Greenburgh. You've seen a lot. So in the 70s, when you were in law enforcement, when you first came on, would you agree that it was really a macho time? It was the time when whatever you had to deal with, that was your problem.
Yeah, that too. And I share this one thing as well. In 1970 and in the early 70s, it was a very turbulent time in our nation. It was not long after the assassination of Martin Luther King. There was rioting. There were anti-governmental agencies, or somewhat agencies out in our communities who were very anti-police. As a matter of fact, it was so bad that they would give you early out. It's called an early out. If you serve 2 years of being drafted or 3 years of being enlisted or longer, they would let you out of the military earlier if you were willing to go on the police departments, because so many police officers were being killed. As a matter of fact, if you were going to a police department in Washington, D.C., they would let you out 6 months early. And so it was a very, very turbulent time. And so, and people were very anti-authority at that time, anti-police. And then some of the stuff that police officers were doing at that time, we were bringing a lot of drama on ourselves because of our behaviors. And you didn't ask me this, but I would just share this one thing that as I reflect and I look back, um, being given a gun and a badge and a uniform did not have any type of bearing on the character of the man. I came as I was, and being given those elements did not change the character. And what I had found out the hard way, and we'll talk about it a little bit later on, I would think, rather than having character, I was a character. And it took quite a while to get that worked out. And you come as you are, and as you said, it was a macho time. If you had issues, if you had drama, if you had problems, if things weren't working out at home, if you didn't know how to do the job well, or if you were afraid, you didn't tell anybody. Yeah, you just stuffed it. You didn't go for counsel. You didn't let your stuff be made known to somebody, because you would be perceived as being weak. And even though you might have known you were weak, you didn't want anybody else to know that. And so you end up living a dual life, and it's not always being weak, but it's just not having the ability to cope with things as well as maybe you felt that you should have or could have.
Would you agree that for a lot of your career, you unfortunately had to deal with a lot of trauma that had an effect on your personal life?
Yeah, and as you mentioned earlier, as you were leading into the program, nobody predominantly is calling you to their home to have a cup of coffee or to sit down and have a meal. It's usually because something negative has taken place, whether there's been a theft, a break-in, a damage to property, a domestic dispute, a fight of some type, a stabbing, a shooting. Yeah, as you shared earlier eloquently, is that you do see society at its worst, and it begins to take a toll on you. It begins to have a drain on you, and it begins to pull on you. But to a certain degree, you fool yourself. You act like I got it and I can handle it. And a lot of times you really can't. And you end up over adjusting and dealing with it. When I went on the police department, I made detective very early in my police career. And I also was on the SWAT team. I went for SWAT training at the FBI Academy down at Quantico. And so, that kind of builds a bravado in you. You think you're the man, but the bottom line is you're as human as everybody else is, and you carry a lot of stuff. And again, I don't know if you are going to get into this today, but when we come on the police department, we come as we are. And so a lot of times we bring baggage from our family history and things that we've gone through in life. And, I have a saying that we're all the products of people who've loved us and people who've not loved us. And probably in every single one of our lives, people have loved us well. And then we've had some people who haven't loved us well. And that begins to do a number on us. And a lot of times I know for myself, I carried a lot of anger when I came on the job. And another saying I have is, who's living rent free in your head? And you bring that on the job as well. Somebody does you wrong today, and you go home and you're thinking about that person all night long. And maybe you never run into that person, but you run into somebody who resembles that person, and you end up taking stuff out on them. Maybe not police officers today, but I know that's how it was when I was on the job.
So you're kind of talking about, your life before law enforcement helping to shape who you are at the entry into law enforcement,
Yeah.
which can be either good or bad for you or for law enforcement in general. Is that correct?
Yeah, either good or bad or both. There's some good things. You've had people in your life that have sown tremendous, wonderful seeds of how to live life. And then you've had it maybe an element in your life where their thought process was totally opposite to the one that was good. And I think I was the victim of both of those. I've had great people in my life, and I've had some people in my life that were detrimental. I mean, I'm responsible for what I do with all that kind of stuff, and I have to own my own stuff. But I growing up in New York City, growing up in the Bronx, and hanging out with some guys who, the reason I went into the military, even some guys who were involved in murder and bank robbery. Even the best man at my wedding did a bank robbery, and a teller was shot and went to prison for 25 years. And but that was the element. So I joined the military to keep from going into that kind of a lifestyle. I felt feeling myself gravitating towards that. As a matter of fact, there are people who found out that I was a police officer and kind of like blown out of the water. Matter of fact, I just share this quickly. I was on a murder investigation where I had to go back into New York City. And so I stopped by my old hood, and I met a woman there, a mother of a friend of mine, and she said, I just know you're not the police. And so, I brought that in, and I want to make this very clear. I thank God that most police officers, most men and women in the job are nothing like the man that I was when I went on the police department. Most are very conscientious and duty minded, and really are about doing the job well. So.
I appreciate you sharing that, which kind of leads me to my next question. When we're talking about the things that shape our character, which cause, in your case, you to become a character, as you said, there's trauma before you came onto the department. Would you agree with that?
For myself?
For yourself, yes.
Oh yeah, I grew up in a home where I was the victim of child abuse. Of course, I didn't realize it was child abuse. I didn't hear anybody talking about child abuse when I was a kid, and you were just getting your beaten. And as I look back on that, I realized that was child abuse, especially when I first became a detective. I worked with juveniles, and so therefore I investigated child abuse. And I would look over my shoulder and go like, "Wow, that's what mom used to do to me," and realize. And I had nobody who was an advocate. Nobody came to my rescue. You were just getting your beaten. And then my mother was involved with organized crime as well. I'm a little ashamed to say all this, but my mother was involved with organized crime as a bookie for the mafia. And when I began later on going into major cases, moving away from the detective division, I never thought about it as a child. But then when I began to investigate organized crime, I was like, wow, that's what mommy used to do. And also, too, then I found out my mom was not my mom. And a girl who lived in our house that was very promiscuous, she was my mother. And all the confusion that came with that. And, who do you go to? You don't cry. You don't, and it wasn't, some of that news was never broken to me in a way that would kind of soothe me, so to speak. It was like almost being punched, when you find out these things, and then you're left to deal with it. And a lot of times we're not prepared to deal with that kind of drama. And so we carry it.
So you brought, kind of that with you into a job that inherently causes you to see even more trauma. So you're building trauma on top of trauma on top of trauma without ever having an opportunity to deal with the trauma. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think maybe you don't even realize it yourself. The behavior changes are subtle. They don't come on you all at once, but they begin to build, and all of a sudden you begin to respond to certain situations. Sometimes things push your buttons. One of the things is, as I've looked back in my career and the career of men and women that are in law enforcement today, the biggest problem that all of us have is that we're human beings. And you can only take but so much, and stuff begins to have an effect on you. And then you're having to deal with other people's struggles, other people's drama, and you take things home with you. You see a tragedy, you see a car accident, maybe a child is killed, or maybe a child has been molested by an adult. Any type of molestation is wrong, of course, but next thing you know, you come home and you're gritting your teeth, and you're just carrying this stuff, and you want somebody to pay the price for uh, the innocence that has been stolen from a child. As an example, that kind of thing. And so those are the things that really catch up with you and begin to do some damage. Sorry about that.
Well, that's okay. So you have all this stuff that's going on, the stuff that you bring onto the job with you, the stuff that you experience on the job, and then the things that you deal with from your partners that are on the job, things you see that are going on with them, and, feeling as if there's really no way for you to help them either. There has to come a point where I often use this as an example. I'm one that believes that we were created in the image and the likeness of God. And as such, then we were created with life and with the ability to give life. So inherent to us is the ability to give life to things. For lack of a better saying, the downside to that is when you bury things in yourself, because inherently you're created to give life, you're burying it to kill it in the very thing that's designed to produce life. So you ultimately, at some point in time, will give life to the very thing you're trying to bury. So then what do? We try to bury it more. We try to find other ways to deal with our trauma, because we feel like we have to deal with it by ourselves. Because in our profession, especially in your time period, this isn't something that you would share with anybody. Were there times when you look to other things to help you deal with the things that you were seeing in people, dealing with in yourself, whether it be alcohol or drugs or promiscuity or the things that really affect, I would say, a high number of law enforcement today?
Yeah, as you were talking about the things that you bury. I use an expression, what's in the well comes up in the bucket. And it's a picture, and it's a pretty gross picture, but I feel that it's important to use it today. Uh, I had an opportunity to speak in the Ukraine. You can't imagine how cold water is in the Ukraine in the month of October. It's like drinking liquid ice. The water is so cold. And but can you imagine being thirsty, and you know about this cold, soothing, refreshing water, and you run to that well and you drop the bucket down in there, and you're cranking it up, and you hear the bucket hitting on the sides, and the water sloshing around your mouth, begins to salivate. But unbeknownst to you, somebody took a boo-boo in that well the night before. And if you keep putting that bucket down there, sooner or later, that boo-boo is going to come out. And I think within ourselves, we keep stuffing stuff and stuffing stuff. That stuff is looking for a way to come out, and it will come out in behavior, whether it be physical, aggressive towards others, aggressive towards yourself, words that come out of your mouth. I'm sure all of us and people who listen to this will think of times that a word came out and you go like, where did that come from? Well, it was in there. It was in there, and it was given the opportunity to come out. And then what I found for myself, you mentioned the list there. I was going like, wow, did this guy read my bio? The issue of what I found out was drinking and substance abuse. I would get drunk or I would get high, the pain would go away. Now, I don't think I realized that fully then, but wow, that feels pretty good not to have this pain going on in my life. And so then all of a sudden you want that more than anything else. And so you're continually finding yourself. I remember I would tell my wife, hey, I'm going to stop with the guys just to have a couple. And there would be no such thing as a couple. It would always be to excess. And I want to stop here and say this. I realize that everyone is not like this, but there are many who are. And like I said, I would get drunk or I would get high, and the pain would go away, and I would like that, not realizing that I'm building up an addiction for myself. And then addictions cause other bizarre behaviors to come out of you, and you turn on yourself sometimes. Can you imagine if you're depressed and you have a drink just to deal with your depression, forgetting that alcohol is a depressant, and so you're taking something that eventually will just make things worse, and you come home and you're a different person. You come home, you take it out on your wife. Sometimes you take it out on your kids, the yelling, the screaming, because those issues down on the inside have not yet been resolved. Yeah, you made yourself feel good for a little while, but it's just not working away. And then all of a sudden, that can create a rift between a husband and a wife, and then that leads to you want comfort, you want to hear nice things, even though your behavior is not reflecting that. And next thing you know, you go look for that comfort, maybe in the arms or the guidance of someone else. And next thing you know, you're somewhere else. Next thing you know, you're divorced, and we know that the divorce rate for police officers, men and women, is very high. I saw so many of my colleagues lose their marriages, or I saw marriages that were nowhere near the way that they should have been, including my own. My wife should have left me, I believe, as I look back on that, because of my behavior at the time. But thank God she was gracious. Thank God she was patient, and there came a change one day. But in the meantime, a lot of damage was done.
So in critical incident stress management, one of the things that they stress is the things that you feel when you deal with trauma is a normal response to an abnormal situation. In other words, that inability to go to sleep at night, that's a normal response to a very abnormal situation.
Mm-hmm.
Having that adrenaline dump, being 100, 100, 100, and then bam, you have that bottom fall out. That's a normal response to a abnormal situation. And trying to deal with that, there are healthy ways to deal with it, and then there are unhealthy ways. I really appreciate your being very open and as we say, 100 with some of the negative ways you tried to deal with it. Realizing within yourself that those things really didn't work. They had temporary effect, but they were not lasting. And you were constantly back into the same place dealing with the same trauma because you never really dealt with what it was you were trying to escape from. In the course of your career, did you ever find something that you would say, now I can stand on 100% that every time I had to deal with trauma, I was able to use this tool or this avenue to help me to kind of deal with the harshness of life that I was involved in?
There came a day, I had been a police officer for 10 years now, and the things that just hit rock bottom. I was really all just messed up. I didn't know where to turn. I didn't know what to do. I did begin to realize that the drinking, and the substance abuse was not working. If I could just share this, is that I really wanted to do the right thing, but I was doing the wrong things. And even the promiscuity and the party guy, Bill was the party guy. It wasn't a party until Bill showed up. But what people never saw was the ride home by myself, the crying, the hurt, the anguish I felt, and the frustration that I felt of being kind of like on a treadmill, unable to get off of it, And so one day I was watching television, and and the man on television, it was a religious program, and he asked two simple questions, and he simply just said, "Hey, are you a sinner?" And I went to church as a little boy, so I had heard about sin, and I realized that my behavior would probably be classified as sin, and so I began to talk to the television. I know this is going to sound crazy to some people. Yeah, I'm a sinner. And then he asked his question. He said, "Do you know Jesus?" And I knew about Jesus, but I did not know Jesus like I know you. And so I said, "No." And he said, "Call the telephone number." And I called the telephone number, and a man explained to me the incredible love of God. Now, that man did not tell me anything I hadn't heard before, but that day, the light came on. And I think prior to that, my thinking was, if there was a God, there's no way in the world he would want to have something to do with me. He would have something to do with you, the people you work with, but not me. And so the man said, "Just come like you are." He didn't tell me to stop doing anything. He said, "Just come like you are." He said, "God has the ability to change your life. God loves you. As a matter of fact, he loves you so much that he let his son pay the penalty for your sin." And I knew about people paying a penalty. I had put a lot of people in jail who paid the penalty for their crime. Nobody went to jail for them. He was more or less saying, Jesus paid the penalty for your sin because the wages of your sin bill is death. And he wants to come into your life. And he said, "You can come just like you are." And I prayed with that man. Christ came into my life, and I was completely, and I mean completely, set free. And I knew it instantly from drinking and substance abuse. It was gone. And I like drinking. I like getting drunk. I like getting high. But all of a sudden, it just seemed like that chip was taken away from me. And I also had, though, a peace that I had never, ever experienced before, and a joy, even to the point when my wife came home that day, there was a different man living in the house, a different man. And I told her about that. And, she was a stereotypical kind of Black woman. And, I told her about this Jesus that who had just now turned my house. Now you can imagine, she just left the house a couple of hours ago to go return gifts from Christmas. It was the day after Christmas, 1980. And she comes home, and the guy who she left was an adulterer, an abuser, and violent, and all of that stuff. And now he says Jesus came into his life. And so she just, yeah, right. And she thought God would kill me. And then shortly after that, he changed her life, the life of her life was nothing like my life. She was a very moral woman, but he changed her life, my kids, my dad, and turned our household around. And I went back to work, a different police officer. And I went back to work, and I don't know how God does what God does, but the day he came into my life, I no longer had to take the job personally. Even though bad stuff happened, even though difficult times would come and stuff like that, I did not have to take it out on the public. People, as far as I was concerned, people did what they did because they didn't have the right relationship with God. It was just that simple for me. Other people might not look at that way. They might not believe that. That was it for me, and it helped me. But if I could just, because I want to come back to something you shared, uh, but I came like I was, but that didn't mean that God had finished. Still, because drinking and drugs weren't really the problem. It's why I was drinking. It's why I was doing drugs. It's why I was being promiscuous. Uh, and then God began to work on those things and then call me to be a minister. And I just share this quickly. I worked at a place called Children's Village. It's a residential treatment center for emotionally disturbed boys. I thought I was going there to help heal these boys. In looking back at it now, I think God sent me there to get healed. And he gave me 300 little bills to work with. And I can relate to those kids, and they can relate to me, because one thing that did not go away instantly was my anger. And there would be things that would push my buttons, and I would overreact to it. And now, because I was a police officer there and the chaplain, associate chaplain, I became a trainer of staff. And I became a licensed trainer in a program called Therapeutic Crisis Intervention, helping emotionally disturbed children deal with crisis. We are all in crisis every single day. And, if you would just see my hands this way, this is calm. But when you're in crisis, it's like this. And there's the Chinese word for crisis is it's a two-part word, danger and oh no, not right now. Uh, uh, a possibility. So like there's always great danger, but the possibility for things to go well. And so I was like, wow, okay. There's always the opportunity to learn. And so something as simple as this question. So you ask these questions, and the question is, hey, what are the buttons that get pushed in your life? And I would ask somebody, and I'll ask the question and I'll answer it the way that I did it during this program. I get upset when, if you publicly embarrass me and make me look bad in front of people, they're laughing at me and mocking me, I want to do things to you. Okay. And so then the knee-jerk response is, and when I get upset, I what? And my knee-jerk response used to be vengeance. And even though there was a scripture in the Bible that says, vengeance is mine, saith the Lord, I shall repay. My attitude towards that at the beginning of my walk with God was, don't trouble yourself, Jesus. I'll take care of this with myself. And that led to a lot of trouble. But God was working on me. And in the 14 years that I worked at that place, during those 14 years, not that it takes that long for everybody, but I'm a little hard-headed. God completely changed me and enabled me and empowered me through his forgiveness of me and enabling me to forgive others and not to take their stuff too seriously. I don't know if
So,
that makes sense or not.
oh no, absolutely. Which actually kind of leads me into this next thought. We're living in a time period where many officers, and of course I won't say all officers, but many officers feel like and have expressed to me, at least here within the city of Columbus, their frustration with the seemingly inability to do anything right. No matter what I do, somebody has a problem with it, whether it's the public, whether it's the brass, trying to apply all the policies and the procedures. I mean, we have books this thick, that have all of our rules and guides and things, and we're supposed to know it all. And, you make your best effort, and because something doesn't look good, politics comes into play, and you just start to get that feeling like no matter what I do, it's wrong. So I'm going to be in trouble, or I'm going to be hung out to dry, what have you. And that's a very real feeling, whether it's legitimate or not. It's still real to the people that feel that way. Added with, we're in a season where the demonization of law enforcement nationwide and the political push in many places to do away with law enforcement to some degree, and in some places entirely, where there have actually been movements within city councils out west to disband their law enforcement agency altogether. So you think about that, you see that having the opportunity today with everything that you've experienced in a time that is much like it is now, but you didn't have the ability to have the support systems that are in place for us today. What would you say to the officer to encourage them to keep pressing forward?
Yeah. Well, the number one thing, not the number one thing, but there's a reason people go into law enforcement. And I think most people really want to make a difference. I think they come on the job with good intention. They don't come on the job to do wrong. But the bottom line, as I said earlier, they're human. And as you were talking, the title to a certain song came to me. It's called Dancing in a Minefield. And the last place you want to go dancing is in a minefield, and because you step on a mine, you blow up. So then if you had to dance in a minefield, can you imagine the paranoia that comes with that? The fear that comes with that, the fear of making one little mistake and things are going to go incredibly south. the other way. That no matter what I do, so there's a tension. It's like playing football. If you play football with the fear of getting hurt, beyond a shadow of a doubt, you're going to get hurt. And so you come with a heightened sense. It doesn't give us a get out of jail card, but you come with a heightened sense of paranoia to a certain degree, there goes some more stuff that you're stuffing down in there that's taking its toll on your humanity, your humanness. You can't tell me of any profession where people don't make mistakes, where people don't make wrong decisions, where people don't drop the ball. And if we do something that's wrong, okay, great. Then maybe we need to suffer the consequences for it. But when you start looking, probing, trying to find something wrong, beyond a shadow of a doubt, you will. Uh, and in the world, and I mean literally, the world is perfect. No one. And so you carry this extra burden, this extra weight. It feels, even though maybe it's not, it feels like everybody is against you. Everybody wants your job. They want your badge number. They want your name. They want to report you for the slightest things. We're in a society of let's make them pay. No sooner does something happen, let's find somebody to point a finger at. Well, why not try to fix some of the problems first, and then we'll deal with some of these other things. It's a very, very difficult place to be and a very difficult job to have today. You have to wear a camera. Now, people will say, well, if you don't do anything wrong, well, why? But in the meantime, you lose your temper and you use a curse word. And next thing you know, you're being brought up on charges for conduct unbecoming. How many people work at the drugstore that curse? Or even curse out a patron, or work down at the supermarket, or drive a sanitation truck, or a school teacher that loses their temper. They lose their temper, but they don't lose their job. We have a job where, as if you go wrong, you can end up losing your job or vast amounts of money, where everybody wants to sue you. So it's a very difficult time. And it's been building, and it's not getting better. I could, this is a teeny weeny segue away, but as you were talking also, one of the thoughts that hit me, the Scared Straight programs of taking kids to prison and allowing them to see what prison life is like. They found out a lot of those programs did not work. Intimidation does not work. They found out education works. So you want to defund the police department. You want to take away resources from the police department, the people who are hired to serve you and protect you, and even the willingness to. And this is something I think the public doesn't hear enough. Men and women go to work every day with the possibility that they might not come home, that they might be killed in the line of duty. Most professions don't have that type of a demand on them. And so you have this pressure on them, and we don't honor that. We don't honor them of folks. So why not educate them? Okay, have a stronger screening process. Are there police officers that shouldn't be police officers? Absolutely. I was one of them. Okay. Are there school teachers that shouldn't be school teachers? Absolutely. Are there sanitation workers that shouldn't be sanitation workers? Absolutely. Okay. But in the meantime, as people are beginning to come on, you wade through, you educate, you teach. A lot of times people have never learned how to deal with cultures that aren't like their own. These are the things that I think will help build character within people and build camaraderie in the police department, and also build a trust between the police and society. Now, maybe I'm
So,
doing that, but okay.
no, I think that you're right on track. So in your time period, as we opened up this conversation, it was that time where it was unheard of to reach out because of the idea that doing that would, make people think that you were weak. So everyone's kind of got that mentality. Through time and how culture itself has changed, the culture of law enforcement is in the process of transition as well. And we currently have things like the chaplaincy program, which has changed from, just having a minister who would, say the prayer at the beginning of a graduation, and that was the chaplain's job. That's all that they did. They were the, official prayer person, so to speak. To what it is today, a tool that can be used for people to, in confidentiality, come and share what they're going. It becomes an outlet. We have another program that's called the Peer Assistance Team. And what that program is it's a group of officers within the division that are specifically trained, also bound by confidentiality, covered by Ohio law, that allows one officer to go to a peer and kind of talk to them mano a mano. Hey, I'm dealing with stuff. I don't know how best to deal with this, whether it's stuff that they're dealing with on the job, from the many things that we see, to things that we're just dealing with in life as general. We also have a very robust employee assistance program. So we have these multiple approaches to employee or police officer wellness, things that you did not have when you started your career, and may not even have been in place 20 years later when you retired, but they're in place now. Would you, from your experience, encourage officers to take advantage of that, or do you think that there's something else that needs to be done?
No, as I look back, and I'll start with my wife. I was thinking about this the other day. In the 20 years, those 20 years of being, I never ever talked to her about anything. And yet and still, she saw this behavior, she saw this anger that I would bring home, or frustration over an overreaction to stuff. And not to say that I could talk to her about anything, because that might not be the wisest thing to do, but I never talked to her about anything. So, I would have wished that, had I known, and knew that I would not be ostracized, if I knew the value of counsel, if I knew the value of talking. There's a Bible verse that even says, confess your faults one to another, and then pray for each other that you can be healed. So when you're walking around and you're holding on to stuff, there's a healing that needs to take place. There's a guilt, a self-condemnation you might feel, even a self-hatred or self-anger towards yourself because of the frustration you feel. If I won't get too biblical here, but there's a verse, and I'm sure everybody can relate to this: the things I want to do, I don't do. The things I don't want to do, those are the things that I do. And I desire to do the right thing. There seems to be something present there with me that's getting in the way of that. And so what do we do when we do what we don't want to do? Who do we go to? And how wonderful it is to be able to talk to somebody and have them speak to us in a way that helps us to move on to the next phase, to be able to just let loose some of the baggage that we're carrying. I think if we had spiritual binoculars where you could see everybody's baggage, we would be surprised at the amount of stuff that people are carrying, especially police officers, because they don't know what to do with it. How do I get rid of this? And so now it's not seen as a weakness. It's almost seen as a necessity, or something that's good and valuable, that you're able to go and more or less like you hear the 18-wheelers release the air brakes, and because when you don't do that in a healthy way, whatever you have stuffed down on the inside is going to come out. It will come out usually in a very negative way, and a not a good way, that kind of thing. So I could not, and especially when you have someone who is sworn to confidentiality, unless you're going to hurt yourself or hurt someone else. Okay, that's one thing. But just because, if you did something, I made a mistake, I did this or I did that, and you'd have somebody you could talk to and know it's not going to go any further than you and that person. How much of a blessing is that? I just feel like, and again, I'll just go back to Children's Village. It was a wonderful place to learn. and to learn the value of being able to talk to somebody. And so I found people in my life that I could talk to. I went for counsel, even though I was off the job. I wish I would have had that counsel earlier on. It would have saved a lot of people in the street some grief, where people were afraid of me rather than me being a friend in the community. I was more of a terror, and I thank God that He worked that out for those last 10 years. But the first 10 years, I was not somebody to be trifled with because of all the stuff I was carrying. So.
Well, I really appreciate the time that you've committed to us today. You're an author. You're a minister. You've traveled around the world, speaking to the military, to youth across the globe, literally across the globe. You've seen a lot. What is one thing from your experience that you would like to sow into the life of everyone who hears our conversation today?
Okay. For me, this is, and I learned this lesson at Children's Village when I was there as the chaplain. Don't do any more damage. Bill Paige, don't you become part of the problem. And if there are things that work in me that need to be fixed, that cause me to be part of the problem, get that fixed. You want to be part of the solution, not part of the problem. When people see a police car roll down the street, they need to know the man and the woman in that car are their friends and can be trusted. If you're carrying stuff, if you're carrying prejudicial stuff, deal with that. If you don't, you're going to do some damage. You will become part of the problem sooner or later. And sooner or later, as we tell people out there, what goes around comes around, and it has a way of coming back to get you. So, yeah, don't do any more damage.
I really appreciate that. And those of you that are watching this, you know me. I've been on the job 28 years, and I've seen a lot in the 28 years that I've been with the Columbus Division of Police. I've been a supervisor since 2007. And I think that I am who I am. And I've had the opportunity to speak with many of you and to share in some of the trauma that you've had to deal with. But I've also, in my career, had to deal with multiple suicides from Columbus Division of Police officers. I've had to deal with alcoholism and drug abuse that ultimately ended up taking the life of some of the people that I worked the street with, that I was close with, that I knew. There is something better, something that's available to us. Bill, has shared probably a paramount statement in that you don't want to become the problem or part of the problem. You took this job to make things better. You took this job because you saw that there was a need. There are tools in place. The chaplaincy program, the peer assistance team, the employee assistance team, all have the full support from the chief on down with a desire that you are able to live a life that is a blessing to you and to the ones that you love. So I encourage you, as Bill so eloquently said, don't be part of the problem, be part of the solution. Use the tools. We all often talk about in police training that when you come on the job with a toolbox, but the toolbox is, kind of empty. And you go to the training academy, here in Columbus, we have our own, and we put some basic tools in that toolbox. And then throughout your career, as you graduate from the academy and you go through the field training program, you get some more tools and you put them in that toolbox. And the whole idea of building tools in the toolbox is for you to be able to have resources that you can access to do the job that you've been commissioned to do. But you also have a job to take care of yourself. I would say that you also have a job to the best of your ability to come home the same person you were when you left your home, if not better than you were. Use the resources, use the gifts that have been given to us so that as you continue in your career as a Columbus Division of Police officer or a supervisor or any other agency that's watching this, take advantage of these tools because you can't do it by yourself. I'll be crystal clear with you. I'm a firm believer in the Lord Jesus Christ. And there's 2 times in the Bible where Jesus does something or the word gives us indication about something that is important. The first time is in the book of Genesis where he's talking to Adam and he realizes that it's not good for Adam to be alone. Now, understand that while God makes this assessment of Adam's condition, God is with Adam. So some would argue, well, Adam really wasn't alone because he was with God. He was walking in the cool of the day with God in the garden. Yet God saw him as alone because there was no one like him to come alongside him to help him deal with life. And then later on, you'll find that when Jesus is getting ready to depart the earth, he sends his disciples out 2 by 2, a necessity that one come along with the other because we need each other. You can't do it by yourself. The expectation is not that you do it by yourself. This load is not meant for you to carry by yourself. We are a cohesive team, and we are successful when we depend on each other. You're not alone. We are here to help you. All of the programs are in place to help you, and I encourage you to take advantage of them. I thank you for your time today, listening to this conversation. Bill, I thank you so much for taking this opportunity to share with us just your experiences and dealing with trauma, which is just a part of being a law enforcement officer. Maybe in our next conversation, we can talk about in more detail some of the things that you've had to deal with, because I know some of the stories, and when you look back on them now, they can be comical or humorous, but when you were in the event, they weren't at that time. So I thank you for your willingness to share and for being open with us and all the law enforcement officers that are watching this. Just thank you so very much. I just want to.
It was an honor to be here. Thank you.
Amen. I just want to salute each and every one of you and tell you, keep on doing it, because if you don't do it, who's going to do it? So thank you for your time today. So, Bill, as we've been talking today, we opened up talking about the suicide rate that affects police officers. And to date, according to Blue Help, the website that kind of tracks law enforcement suicide, 128 police officers to a varying degree have committed suicide. They believe connected to their career in law enforcement. Definitely they were law enforcement officers. We've seen a trend from 2017 to 2022 where it was going up. 2017, 2018, 2019, we got up to 197 suicides by police officers. Then it started to come down in 2020 and 2021. These are the years of COVID. There's not a lot going on. A lot of law enforcement stuff had kind of settled down because the whole entire culture settled down. But suicide is real. And it's things that people in the law enforcement field contemplate. Was there ever a time with everything that you've carried, everything that you've seen and been through, where you contemplated suicide?
There was one night in particular, going home. I felt I was just failing in so many areas of my life. I was not the man I was supposed to be. I was not the husband I needed to be, and I was dwelling on these things, and I was hating who I was becoming. And all of a sudden, the negativity of me. I became so self-focused on me and my issues rather than a solution, rather than a way out. That particular night, it seemed to me like suicide was, as I look back on it, how crazy was the thought to think that suicide was a good option. That there was other help around you. All you have to do is turn to get the help that you need. And I just turned inward. And on this particular night, I had made up my mind to commit suicide. And I really kind of feel within my heart, and it might sound crazy to some people out there listening to this, but I kind of felt like if there is a devil, and I do believe there is one, I felt that God said, this is how he deceives my children into committing suicide, by getting them to be so self-focused on themselves, taking our eyes off of him, taking our eyes off possible solutions, something as simple as stop the behavior that you're involved in. I had become part of the problem. But that hope turned it around for me. Like I was kind of blown away that really God doesn't want to kill me. He doesn't want to get rid of me, but he wants me to stop what I'm doing. And that night was the beginning of stopping what I was doing. And God turned it around, even to the degree where I was at a certain place on a bridge. And a week later, getting ready to go to Europe to speak, an iron bar almost directly opposite on that bridge, going the opposite direction, which is kind of a symbol to me at least. An iron bar came through the windshield of my car and embedded itself in the speedometer. And it just said to me how much God cared about me, cared about what I was going through, was there to give me the help. You mentioned earlier about you're not alone, that I was not alone, that God was in this with me. Didn't approve of what I was doing, but had the ability to turn it around for me. And things have been different ever since.
So you're driving along on this bridge, and an iron bar just shoots right through your windshield or your window, and
it would have fallen off the truck that was in front of me, hit the road, came up, and it literally embedded in the speedometer. The window exploded just before it happened. I turned my head, by God's grace, I would have gotten glass in my eyes, but rather than get in my eye, got in my hair. I had hair at the time, and got it in my ear, but no, not a scratch, not a scratch. And even caught the truck driver and talked to him about it. And it's going to sound a little crazy, but he had given his life to Jesus a long time ago and walked away. And we prayed together right there on the highway. He gave his life back to the Lord, got in his 18-wheeler, and boom, boom, disappeared into the sunrise. So, hey, what can I say?
well, I'm glad that you did not commit suicide.
Me too.
Amen. Amen. When you were contemplating doing this, had you like really thought it out and devised a plan, and you were ready to implement that plan? And if that's the case, what was it specifically that made you stop and not institute what you had thought about doing?
This thought seemingly came out of nowhere. And so there was never an overall plan other than the plan I had at the moment. I had a little Honda at that time. I was going to drive under the wheels of an 18-wheeler on the bridge. And not to say that necessarily would even kill you, but that was my plan, to go under the wheels of this 18-wheeler. But all of a sudden, it just seemed like, going through that thought process, there was hope. Okay. All right, we'll get it. We're going to give this a shot. It was almost like the day when I came to the Lord, when he said, come like you are. I came to God as I was, messed up, being silly and being foolish and wrong. And God was able to turn my life around.
Amen. I've often said that it's okay to recognize that we're broken, flawed beings. It's not okay to recognize it and just stay that way.
Mm-hmm.
You have the opportunity to be better, and you should take advantage of every opportunity that you're given, because tomorrow is never promised to us, especially in our field of work. You had said, earlier that, we're in that line of work where when I leave today, it might be the last. It might be, this is the day that I'm not coming home. And that's a reality. Here in the city of Columbus, we just had a police officer who was on his way to work in his personal car, wasn't in a police car, but he had his uniform on, and somebody pulled up alongside of him, recognized that he was a police officer in uniform, and opened, the officer said that they were kind of, he noticed there was a car kind of mirroring him on the highway. And when he looked over at the car, the guy had a gun pointed at him and opened fire. And multiple rounds went into the officer's car, blew out his window, and he veered off the road, and that car kept on going. But that officer right then could have lost his life.
Yeah.
And dealing with things like that, you get to the place where you may say, what's the use? What is the use? Why am I still doing this?
Mm.
And you get to that point where you almost want to give up. But I love how you said there's hope. The Bible tells us it's hopelessness is where despair is born, and that feeling that really is not true, that there's not something better. And I firmly believe that you sharing that, not just your contemplation, but the thought process that went through, here I am. What can we do? How can we make this better? I'm open to the idea. And I think that that's what we need to do, is to be open to the idea that maybe what I'm thinking is not the end. Maybe what I've seen and experienced is not the end, but there's something better out there for me. And I want to be here so that I can be better.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for sharing that. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
This has been a production of the GMFC Studios. God bless you.